I have been wanting to make a video for the longest time on the Toronto housing bubble because it's an objection I hear every single day. So I'll be honest with you, I get on the phone with clients all the time, and they tell me the bubble's going to burst, which is ironic because they're on the phone discussing investing in the very market they think is going to collapse. Which is, I'm no financial planner or anything, but it seems kind of counterintuitive. So I decided to pull the numbers. I decided to make the graphs and figure out if we are indeed in a bubble. Okay, so this is the Toronto market, right? This is the historical housing prices from 1976 to 2018. Detached versus condo. It's not actually detached. This is just a typo. It's just the benchmark. So any condo, detached, semi-detached, all rolled into this versus condo explicitly, and you can kind of see over time the trajectory of the price. So we'll get into the history of the price a little bit later, but to start, here's why everyone is freaking out, or have been freaking out for a long time. Not only have we had a really strong price rally in the past 5-10 years, we have also, this here is what you need to look at for the benchmark price. So you see that it kind of peaks, it comes down a little bit, and then a little return. Well, people like to compare this graph to this graph, and this graph is literally a textbook example of a housing bubble, what a housing bubble looks like. So the price rally, right, and then a little bit of a large dip, and then a slight return before just plummeting, right? So based on this, yeah, absolutely, Toronto does look like a housing bubble, but it's important to not just look at this graph. Also, you got to look at the fundamentals, right? And in order to know what a bubble is, well, you got to read the definition. So the definition of a housing bubble is run-up housing prices fueled by demand, speculation, and exuberance. Particularly speculation, right? Because demand itself is just an economic driver. Supply and demand 101, right? If you have more supply, or you have more supply than demand, you're going to see prices go down. And if you have more demand than supply, you're going to see prices go up. So we need to figure out if we have. Okay, so what's the easiest way to figure out if you have too much property speculation, too many investors betting on the market increasing? Well, the easiest way is to just look at the home ownership rate and the incline or decline of the rate. That also speaks to affordability a bit as a factor. So home ownership, if you have a very low home ownership and an extremely high renter rate, then you know that you have a lot of speculators because you have a lot of people investing and renting out said units. And if you have a high home ownership, you likely have less investors and more end users, meaning people who buy to move in instead of investing and speculative investing, right? So when we look at Toronto, we have a home ownership rate of 66.5%. Now this has declined a bit because this is the 2016 census, right? So a lot of the stats we're going to use is 2016 because that's the best we've got right now, with a renter share of 33.5% and a decline in home ownership rate of 1.1%. So we're healthier of a market in terms of the demographic, in terms of the split of end user versus investor, than Vancouver, than Montreal, than Philadelphia, Chicago, Houston, LA, New York City for sure. New York City has a low home ownership rate because of the high price point, largely. So in terms of, do we have speculators? Absolutely. I work with them every day. A lot of them are my clients. Do we have too many? Doesn't, on first glance, we don't appear to. Okay, so based on current home ownership rate, I think it's fair to say we can rule out speculative investing as the number one primary market driver. It's definitely there. It's definitely a secondary, tertiary driver, just like any market. Because keep in mind that the definition of a speculative investing are people investing in the property market with the hope that the market's going to go up. And if you're investing in the property market, you're certainly not hoping that the market's going to go down. So by default, we're all speculative if we invest in the property market. Now, so then what is driving the market? Well, simple supply and demand, right? And that can be broken down. But from a reductionist standpoint, it's just supply and demand. So what are the factors behind the supply and demand? And are any of those artificially inflated? Because in order for it to be a bubble, it can't be normal supply and demand economics. There has to be some, usually, external cause of price appreciation. Otherwise, it's just the local market doing what it does. Okay, we're gonna start with supply because it's the easier number. It's the easier number to pinpoint. It's more absolute. Demand is, there's all kinds of reasons why demand would go up or down. So Supply is pretty straightforward. It's how many units, homes or condos are completed in a given year. That's how much new supply you have for the market. This is an article from Better Dwelling, and these aren't cherry-picked numbers. Better Dwelling has been betting on the housing market collapse since before my time, so these are definitely accurate numbers. These are also corroborated by Urban Nation. If you want unbiased information, by the way, check Urban Nation. Avoid people like Toronto Star, Huffington Post, Globe and Mail. None of those guys know what they're talking about. So 30,000 to 40,000, that's roughly how many units we complete per year on average. This goes from 1990 through to 2018, so we're going to focus more, on this half of the graph, and you're going to see we bring about 35,000 units to market every single year that didn't exist the year prior. So that stands to reason that our supply is 35,000, and if 35,000 people move into the city looking for homes, and we have 35,000 new homes, prices would stagnate. They would go sideways because there's no excessive demand and no excessive supply. Okay, so the number one demand indicator is population growth, or in other words, immigration. As more people move into the city than move out, you have naturally, they all need homes and the demand increases accordingly. This is a projection from the CBC, so take it with a grain of salt, from 2017 through 2041 based on current immigration levels, which I believe are 300 to 350,000 per year, give or take, under Trudeau. Not to get too political, don't really want to touch on this too much, but conservatives and liberals, neither of them plan on slowing immigration. So current immigration levels at 300 to 350,000 look here to stay. So you've probably already seen this. This is Ryerson's study for 2018, the net population gain in cities in North America. And this is way more accurate picture than the last graph because it shows not just net population gain, but also loss. It accounts for people who moved into Toronto as well as people moved out. So Toronto for 2018, we gained 77,000 people, putting us in the number one spot, the most rapidly growing major metro area in North America, or at least between USA and Canada. Phoenix at number 2 with just 25,000. Chicago, our sister city, lost 7,000, and New York lost over almost 40,000. So we're growing rapidly, and this speaks to more than just the housing market appreciation. It also speaks to things like, tremendous job growth, opportunity, social and economic stability in our city. Otherwise, we wouldn't be growing at this pace. The tech sector in Toronto is growing rapidly, and this is important to note because the tech sector has abnormally high wages, and it brings a ton of money and investment into whatever city it grows in. So Toronto was scored number 3 out of all the cities in Canada and the US for the fastest growing and best place to start a tech business in 2018. Number 1 was naturally San Francisco's Bay Area. Number 2 was, I believe, Seattle, and number 3 was Toronto, trailing not far behind them. Okay, so what makes the tech sector so great for Toronto, and by extension, the housing market? Well, first off, and the most obvious, is the job growth and the population gain from that. That obviously increases demand in the city, and it's important to note that these people are able to afford what our city has to offer. They drag up the median salary notably, and they help add to that economic pool of buyers who can support higher prices. So naturally, this begs the question, will the tech boom continue? I'm going to go with a unanimous yes on this. There's almost no question in my mind, and here's why. So let's say our median salary is $100,000. Keep in mind this is Canadian. The median salary for the exact same tech worker in San Francisco is $130,000 US. So if you take our 100K Canadian and you adjust it to US dollars, it's about $75,000. So you can get the same employee in Toronto for $75,000, or you can get them in San Fran for $130,000. That's just one element of starting a tech firm. Obviously, you also have office costs. So Toronto's average per square foot for office, let's call it, round up, call it $28 per square foot. Want to guess what San Francisco's is? $69. And this is just a function of they've been undergoing a tech boom for a lot longer than us. So naturally, it makes sense that a lot of businesses like Shopify are up and snatching all kinds of office space downtown and moving a lot of employees here. And this is only going to continue. The other thing to note is, even though our employees work for much less in Toronto doing the exact same jobs, their quality of life is higher. Because our rent is so much lower than San Francisco's, their living cost relative to their income is way higher than ours. So not only did the businesses get to prosper and profit more, to the degree of, by the way, 47%. So it's 47% cheaper to run the exact same business in Toronto. And we almost have the same talent pool, about 230,000 talent pool in Toronto versus 300,000 in San Fran. So it's not all that much different. So naturally, it's more profitable to run the business in Toronto, and your employees get a better quality of life. So look, if you've bothered to listen to me rant for this long, you're inevitably a pretty smart person. So you're looking at this graph, which is again, if you remember from the beginning, the historical Toronto housing prices, and you're saying, well, if the underlying fundamentals are so good and we're in such a great market, what is this price dip here in 2017? And I'll get to that. First thing I want to point out is the media reported on this a lot. You probably heard about it. You're probably still hearing about it because we're just rebounding now. However, it's important to know, though, that that is the detached market. So the detached market took a dive, but the condo market did not. It continued and sailed clean through it. So why is that? Okay, quick mini lesson. There's something in real estate that we use to figure out the temperament of the market. It's called months of inventory. It's how you figure out if you're in a seller's market, a balanced market, or a buyer's market. Put simply, it's just how quickly listings are selling and how many listings there are. So for example, if you have 100 listings on the market and 50 listings are selling every month, you have 2 months of inventory because that's how quickly 100 listings would sell. Anything from 0 to 4 months is a seller's market. This is where prices are appreciating. 4 through 7 is a balanced market. That's where prices are probably keeping up with inflation, maybe appreciating a bit. And 7 through 10 is a buyer's market where potentially prices could decrease. It's important to know what months of inventory is because it's a very easy way to see what the current demand and supply of the market is. The lower the months of inventory, the more buyers there are in the market and the less sellers there are. All right, so we're going to use months of inventory to investigate and see what exactly happened here to the detached market. So we'll hop over to this chart here, which is months of inventory versus the average price of detached homes in Toronto from 2008 through today. This is obviously when the price decreased. But before we jump to that, yellow is months of inventory. So lower means stronger appreciating. Lower means you're further into a seller's market, and higher means you have more inventory on the market. You can do this with pretty much any property market in the world. You can pull months of inventory and you can pull average price. And what you're going to find is the graphs mimic each other. They're sort of an inverse of each other. So, for example, let's take this here. You see months of inventory go up a little bit, and it's sort of an M pattern. What happens to the price? W pattern right above it, the same dates. Price decreases with inventory going up because buyers have more options. Okay, so what happened here? Any of my realtor friends are going to recognize that day, or that time of the year. This was when the Fair Housing Plan was announced, and then a couple months later, right about here actually, was the mortgage stress test. So we're seeing a peak of almost 1.4 million in the average price, and then the Fair Housing Plan comes out courtesy of the Liberals, and we see the price decrease to just below 1.2 million. Let's call it, a 20% drop. What's interesting is the mortgage stress test changed the affordability for people. So mortgage stress test made it harder to get qualified. It actually took purchasing power away from you. And what you'll notice is it took about 20% of your purchasing power away. This was what you could afford with 150K in income. You could afford 1.025 million. After the stress test, you could only afford 835K. Interesting. So we see a 20% reduction in buying power, and we see a 20% reduction in price. Okay, so here's the same graph, months of inventory, but this is for condos. So average price of condos in Toronto. Let's go to the same date here. This was when the Fair Housing Plan was announced. You see a little bit of a price dip, but a rebound much quicker, whereas the detached market continued to plateau and go sideways there. And you can see months of inventory for condos was at 1.5. And it's kind of averaged between 1.5 and 2 ever since then. And so we've actually been in an extreme seller's market for condos ever since the Fair Housing Plan. Okay, so while the Fair Housing Plan had a role to play, the mortgage stress test was absolutely the catalyst in diving the detached market. Previously, let's assume $1 million median price. Someone with 150K household income could have afforded that before the stress test. After the stress test took effect, there was absolutely no way. If you find a detached house for that price, you're going to need $100,000 for renovations. Anyways, household income now, you're looking at the $200,000 plus bracket for someone to afford that median average home. So obviously that limits the buyer pool massively for those homes that would have sold no problem previous to the stress test implementation. Really quickly, I want to touch on the affordability factor, just because inevitably I know people are going to tell me nobody makes that kind of money. Well, the truth is plenty of people do, especially in our city, and wages are growing quickly. So this is census mapper, so keep in mind this data is from 2016, or rather 2015 tax returns. So people would be making more money than this now, especially with all of the tech, the tech business that's booming in Ontario. So this is the percentage of people making $100,000 or more in Toronto. Roughly just over 30% of the population makes enough money to purchase the median condo. Now, if I were to go to, let's say, census tract, anything you see in red means that there's less than 20% of people in that particular neighborhood that could afford to purchase into the market. White means there's 20 to 30% of people who can afford to purchase in that market, and blue means that there is 30% or more of the households in that area could afford to purchase based on current median price. This map here is $200,000 and more, basically, who can afford the detached homes. 8%, 9% of Toronto makes $200,000 or more. Which means that there's a considerable amount of people who can afford those detached homes. Obviously, it's not the affordability ratio that everyone would hope for, especially if you're one of those people who needs a backyard, but it's definitely within the realm of possibility, and there's enough buyers for those detached homes. Keep in mind that if you go to New York City, you're not going to find people below the wealthiest 10% living in a detached home in and around New York. It's just not affordable. As Toronto grows and as we become an economic hub and a technology hub, it's just not reasonable for most people to be able to afford a full detached home. And put a little bit more cut and dry, this is an affordability chart for price to income ratio. So this isn't just sheer price. Toronto still has tons of room to grow. We're, in terms of income versus price, we're more affordable than Sydney, Vancouver, Buenos Aires, San Francisco, Paris, Sao Paulo. The list goes on, right? We have tons of room to grow before that, before the stagnated wages or the unaffordable objection really comes into play. Which brings me to the last and final point here. The reason that the detached market didn't rebound and didn't rally in terms of price in the same way the condo market did was because the multiple was out of whack. And what I mean by that is, here you see the blue line. This is the condo price, condo median price, and the orange line is the detached median price. And this is the multiple, meaning it's 1.7x more expensive to buy a detached than a condo. Based on New York City, based on San Francisco, and other major metro areas, a healthy multiple is about 2x. And for most of Toronto's history, that's about what our multiple was. 2016 and 2015 led up to an insane appreciation curve in the detached market, where everyone was buying, tons of investing was happening, and people were entering bidding wars with 20, 30 offers, where things were selling for $100, $200, in some cases $300,000 more than asking. And that multiple broadened. We got to 2.5x, and at that point it became a bargain to buy a condo. And when the stress test entered and took a chunk out of everyone's purchasing power, naturally people shifted over to the next most affordable market, which is the condo market. And we can see that here, that we're now, as the housing market starts to rebound, particularly the detached market, and condos continue to do well, we're maintaining this 1.9 times multiple. So realistically, both markets are going to continue to appreciate at probably normal rates, 8-9% per year, for the inevitable future.